On April 4, 1968, at exactly 6:01 p.m., a single gunshot cracked through the evening air in Memphis, Tennessee. Within seconds, the most recognizable voice of the American civil rights movement lay bleeding on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was 39 years old. The official story seemed straightforward. A fugitive named James Earl Ray fired one shot from a nearby boarding house, fled the scene, and was captured 2 months later in London. Case closed. But for millions of Americans, the case never truly ended, because almost immediately, the questions began. Was Ray really the assassin? Did he act alone? Or had the government, organized crime, or powerful political forces silenced a man whose influence had become too dangerous to ignore? This is the story of the assassination that shocked the world, and the conspiracy theories that refused to die. By the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was no longer fighting only for civil rights. He had begun speaking about poverty, economic inequality, and the Vietnam War. To supporters, he was evolving into a broader champion of justice. To critics, he was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Memphis was already on edge. More than 1,000 sanitation workers were on strike, protesting dangerous working conditions and low wages. King arrived to support them. The night before his death, he delivered what would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. "I've been to the mountaintop. I may not get there with you." The words sounded almost prophetic. Many who were in the room later recalled feeling that King seemed unusually reflective, even aware of the possibility that his life was in danger. Threats against him were constant. The FBI had monitored him for years. J. Edgar Hoover considered him a threat. Wiretaps, surveillance, anonymous letters, and attempts to discredit him had become part of his daily reality. King knew he was being watched. What he could not know was that less than 24 hours later, history would stop on a motel balcony. King stepped outside room 306 of the Lorraine Motel. He joked with friends. He leaned over the railing and spoke to musician Ben Branch, asking him to play "Take My Hand, Precious Lord" at that evening's event. Then the shot rang out. Witnesses heard a loud crack. King collapsed instantly. The bullet entered his right cheek, traveled through his neck, and severed his spinal cord. Chaos erupted. People pointed toward a boarding house across the street. Police rushed to the area. Within minutes, investigators found a bundle abandoned near the building. Inside was a rifle, binoculars, and other personal items. The rifle was traced to James Earl Ray. For authorities, the evidence appeared overwhelming, but the first cracks in the story emerged almost immediately. James Earl Ray was an escaped convict. He had fled a Missouri prison in 1967 and spent months traveling across the United States and Canada using aliases. After the assassination, he continued moving through multiple countries before being arrested at London's Heathrow Airport on June 8, 1968. At first, Ray pleaded guilty. He received a 99-year sentence, but 3 days later, he recanted. "I'm not the man who shot Martin Luther King." He claimed he had been manipulated by a mysterious figure he knew only as Raoul. According to Ray, Raoul instructed him where to go, what to buy, and how to move across cities. Ray admitted purchasing the rifle. He admitted being in Memphis. Operation investigators searched for Raoul. No conclusive evidence ever proved the man existed. To skeptics, the story sounded like a desperate attempt to escape responsibility. To conspiracy theorists, it sounded like the first glimpse of a hidden network. One of the most persistent theories centers on the U.S. government itself. The FBI's campaign against King is not speculation. It is documented fact. Through the COINTELPRO program, the Bureau conducted extensive surveillance of civil rights leaders. Agents recorded King's private conversations. They attempted to expose alleged personal misconduct. In one infamous incident, an anonymous letter was sent to King that appeared to encourage him to take his own life. This history created a foundation for suspicion. If the government had already tried to destroy his reputation, could it have gone further? Supporters of the theory point to several factors. King's growing opposition to the Vietnam War, his plans for the Poor People's Campaign, his increasing criticism of systemic economic inequality, the intense surveillance surrounding his movements. However, decades of investigations have never produced credible evidence that the FBI or any federal agency, the alleged murder plot remains unproven. That distinction is crucial. Another theory focuses not on Washington, but on Memphis itself. Researchers have questioned the security arrangements surrounding King that day. Some have argued that police protection was unusually reduced. Others have pointed to alleged inconsistencies in witness statements, the timing of police responses, and the handling of physical evidence. A particularly controversial claim emerged years later, when restaurant owner Lloyd Jowers alleged that the assassination involved local figures and that Ray was not the actual shooter. In 1999, a civil trial brought by the King family resulted in a jury finding that Jowers was part of a conspiracy. The verdict generated enormous headlines, but there was a catch. The federal government was not a defendant in that case. The standard of proof was different from a criminal trial, and subsequent investigations by the U.S. Department of Justice concluded that Jowers' claims were not credible and were unsupported by reliable evidence. Even so, the trial gave conspiracy theories new life. For many Americans, the existence of any courtroom finding suggesting a conspiracy seemed significant. Regardless of the later federal conclusions, by the end of the 1970s, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. had become more than a criminal case. It had become a mirror reflecting America's deepest distrust of power. For decades, researchers have combed through thousands of pages of police reports, FBI files, witness interviews, and court records. The deeper they looked, the more questions they found, not necessarily proof of a conspiracy, but enough uncertainty to keep the debate alive. Some witnesses believed the shot came from a different direction than investigators concluded. Others later changed parts of their testimony. There were disagreements over the exact timeline, questions about the rifle, questions about fingerprints, questions about evidence that some believed had been mishandled. None of those questions by themselves proved James Earl Ray was innocent, but together they fueled an enduring suspicion. Had investigators solved the case or simply closed it? By the late 1970s, public confidence had collapsed. The assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. had convinced many Americans that something larger was happening behind the scenes. Congress responded. In 1976, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened both the JFK and King cases. The committee spent years reviewing evidence. They interviewed witnesses, re-examined forensic reports, analyzed intelligence files, studied James Earl Ray's movements before and after the murder. When the committee released its findings in 1979, its conclusion surprised almost everyone. It agreed that James Earl Ray fired the fatal shot, but investigators also said there was a possibility that Ray had received limited assistance from others before or after the assassination. The committee did not find evidence that the FBI, CIA, military, or federal government ordered King's murder, nor did it identify a second gunman. Instead, it concluded that while Ray was responsible for the shooting, some unanswered questions remained regarding whether others had helped facilitate aspects of the crime. For conspiracy theorists, those unanswered questions became the story. Perhaps the most unexpected voices questioning the official narrative were members of Martin Luther King Jr.'s own family. Years after the assassination, Coretta Scott King publicly expressed doubts that James Earl Ray had acted entirely alone. She met with Ray in prison, not because she believed every word he said, but because she believed the investigation had left important questions unanswered. Other members of the King family echoed similar concerns. They argued that Ray deserved a full trial, one he never received, because after pleading guilty, he waived the opportunity for a public trial where evidence could have been challenged in open court. 3 days later, he tried to withdraw his plea, but it was too late to many observers. That decision became one of the greatest what-ifs in modern American legal history. What might a full trial have revealed? No one knows, because it never happened. James Earl Ray spent the rest of his life behind bars. For nearly 3 decades, he maintained the same story. He admitted buying the rifle. He admitted traveling to Memphis. He admitted fleeing the country, but he insisted he had been manipulated by a mysterious man known only as Raoul. Investigators searched repeatedly for evidence that Raoul existed. No reliable evidence was ever found. No confirmed identity. No verified photographs. No financial records. No witnesses who could conclusively place such a person at the center of the assassination. To critics, Raoul was simply an invention, a convenient explanation created after Ray realized he would spend the rest of his life in prison. To believers, Raoul represented the missing piece, the invisible link between Ray and a larger conspiracy. James Earl Ray died in prison in 1998. He never admitted to firing the rifle, nor did he ever provide evidence that convinced investigators someone else orchestrated the crime. His secrets, if any existed, died with him. Does the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. remain surrounded by conspiracy theories? The answer may have less to do with hidden evidence, and more to do with history itself. Americans later learned that the FBI had secretly surveilled King, that agents attempted to discredit him, that intelligence agencies had conducted covert operations against political groups. These confirmed abuses of power made people wonder. If the government had hidden the truth before, could it have hidden it again? That question has never fully disappeared, and it continues to shape public opinion today. But suspicion is not the same as proof. After decades of investigations, multiple federal inquiries, congressional reviews, and independent examinations, no credible evidence has established that a government agency ordered King's assassination. No verified second gunman has ever been identified. No conspiracy has been proven in a criminal court. The official conclusion remains unchanged. According to the evidence accepted by U.S. courts and reinforced by later federal investigations, James Earl Ray was the man who assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. Whether he acted with assistance in planning or escape has been debated. Whether others encouraged him has been debated. Whether mistakes were made during the investigation has certainly been debated. But the central conclusion has remained consistent. Ray fired the fatal shot. That is the official historical record. Closing Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Perhaps that is why people continue searching for answers. Because when a man who preached peace was killed by violence, many refused to believe history could be so simple. Maybe the unanswered questions are why the case still fascinates us. Or maybe it is because King's life ultimately became far greater than the mystery surrounding his death. The bullet ended a life, but it did not silence a movement. His dream outlived the man. His words crossed generations, and while the conspiracy theories continue to spark debate, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. no longer depends on who stood behind the rifle. It lives on in every march, every vote, every voice demanding equality. Some mysteries may never be answered to everyone's satisfaction, but one fact remains beyond dispute. On April 4, 1968, America lost one of its greatest leaders, and the echoes of that single gunshot are still heard today.